This past Saturday, in a quiet home in Los Angeles, surrounded by the people who loved her most, Shelley Fabares passed away at 82 years old. And somewhere in that room was the man who'd spent more than 40 years by her side, Mike Farrell, the actor generations of television viewers knew as Captain B.J. Honeycutt on MASH, now facing the one role no amount of rehearsal ever prepares a person for. The statement his family finally released was brief, dignified, and heartbreakingly plain. For anyone who grew up watching her sing on a black and white television set, or fall for Elvis Presley on the big screen, or trade quips with Craig T. Nelson decades later, that description will feel exactly right. This is the story of the girl from Santa Monica who became America's daughter, America's sweetheart, and finally, quietly, one half of one of Hollywood's most enduring real-life love stories. Shelley Fabares, born Michelle Anne Marie Fabares on January 19, 1944, in Santa Monica, California, seemed almost destined for the camera from the very start. She began acting at just 3 years old, made her official television debut at 10 in a 1954 episode of The Loretta Young Show, and by the time she was a young teenager, she was already sharing the screen with Annette Funicello in Walt Disney's beloved 1958 serial, Annette. Show business, in a sense, ran in the family. Her aunt was Nanette Fabares, the Tony-winning stage legend and comic partner to Sid Caesar. And young Shelley grew up watching a family member navigate exactly the kind of career she herself would soon step into. That step came in 1958 when, at just 14 years old, she was cast as Mary Stone, the bright, endlessly relatable daughter on The Donna Reed Show. For 7 seasons, audiences across America watched Shelley Fabares grow up in real time on their television screens. And by the early 60s, she wasn't just an actress anymore. She was a full-blown teen idol, the kind of star who received sacks of fan mail every week from viewers who felt like they genuinely knew her. It was during those Donna Reed Show years that Shelley Fabares became something even rarer than a beloved television daughter, a genuine chart-topping recording artist, almost by accident. In 1962, her single Johnny Angel shot straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, eventually selling over 1 million copies and earning a gold certification. It's the song people still remember most vividly decades later, the one that made teenage boys across the country feel hypnotized by her voice, the one mothers dance their babies to in living rooms, the kind of song that gets passed down in memory from one generation to the next. She followed it with more chart entries that same year, Johnny Loves Me and The Things We Did Last Summer, proving Johnny Angel was no fluke. There's a small, funny story from decades later that fans of the show still love to retell. At a 2011 reunion of the show's surviving cast, Fabares recalled being nervous about having to dance for a particular scene, and Donna Reed herself tried to calm her nerves by admitting, with a straight face, that there were 3 things she personally couldn't do: swim, dance, or act. And yet somehow she'd built an entire career doing exactly those 3 things anyway. It was the kind of dry, self-deprecating humor that Fabares clearly carried with her for the rest of her life. The ability to laugh gently at the absurdity of show business, even while thriving inside it. Beyond her signature role,
Fabares kept working steadily across television's golden decades, popping up in beloved series like The Twilight Zone, The Incredible Hulk, The Rockford Files, Fantasy Island, Mork and Mindy, and The Love Boat. The kind of reliable guest appearances that made her a familiar, comforting face in households across the country for generation after generation. Whether or not viewers always remembered exactly which show they'd first fallen for her on.
Nothing captures who Shelley Fabares really was, quite like the way she talked about Elvis Presley, a friendship fans still bring up in her memory more than almost anything else in her filmography. She met him on the set of Girl Happy in 1964, and she described that first encounter with a clarity that hadn't faded even decades later. She remembered standing on the soundstage when something shifted in the room. Everyone simply stopped, and there he was, walking in, doing nothing at all except existing, carrying a kind of presence she said she genuinely never witnessed in another human being before or since. She'd expected to feel nothing, she admitted, since her heart at the time belonged to Jimmy Stewart, not Elvis. Instead, the two of them simply clicked, the way she put it, the way some people just recognize each other instantly without knowing why. She went on to make 3 films with him in total: Girl Happy, Spin Out, and Clambake, more movies than any other leading lady in his career, and she insisted again and again that despite what tabloids loved to speculate, there was never a romance between them. Every woman around him, she said, seemed to gravitate toward him like radar, and he knew it. So the fact that Shelley genuinely liked him, without any of that undertow, seemed to let him exhale a little. She recalled one afternoon at the MGM commissary, deep into what she called the lowest point of his career, right as the Beatles had swept the entire country's attention away from him. She was mid-lunch, back to the door, when the room simply erupted, hundreds of people abandoning their tables at once, rushing toward the glass entrance where Elvis stood, peering in from outside. He never even came inside. He just looked, then vanished, and 700 people had still sprinted toward him anyway. She said she never fully understood how a 19-year-old boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, was supposed to survive that kind of adoration, over and over, for a lifetime, and that she genuinely ached for what eventually happened to him. Her favorite memory of him wasn't glamorous at all. It was the final scene they ever filmed together on Clambake, a scripted gag where her character opens Elvis's wallet, expecting to see his driver's license, only to find a photograph the crew had secretly swapped in, a wildly unflattering picture of an elderly, toothless woman. The take that made it into the film shows Fabares so hard she can barely speak, and Elvis nearly doubled over the steering wheel beside her, caught slightly out of focus because he couldn't stop shaking with laughter either. Decades later, she still called it one of her favorite photographs in the world. "I miss him every day," she said, plainly, no embellishment needed. Around that same period in 1964, she married music producer Lou Adler, a marriage that would eventually end in divorce, years before the far more lasting partnership that awaited her. It began, almost invisibly, back in 1970, when she first crossed paths with Mike Farrell, the actor television audiences knew as Captain B.J. Honeycutt on MASH on a Los Angeles set, 2 working actors with no particular reason to expect anything permanent between them. Nothing came of it right away. Life carried both of them in different directions for years, through other marriages, other heartbreaks, and other careers taking shape at their own separate paces. It wasn't until years later, after Farrell's own marriage had ended and Fabares had long since moved past her own first marriage, that the two of them reconnected, and this time everything clicked into place. Shelley Fabares married Mike Farrell in 1984, and what followed was more than 4 decades of a devotion so total it eventually became, in its own quiet way, one of her favorite stories to tell. During the long, frightening years when doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with her liver, both she and Farrell carried medical pagers everywhere, waiting for the call that a donor organ had finally become available. She used to joke that after the 7th or 8th wrong number woke them up in a panic, she turned to her husband and said they needed to come up with a better system, or one of them was going to die of a heart attack before the transplant ever happened. It's the kind of gallows humor only 2 people who trust each other completely can share in the middle of something that frightening. There's another story from that same period that says even more about who they were together. Midway through her illness, exhausted and weakened, she sat in a hair salon chair one afternoon, admiring another client's wildly dyed, spiked, hot pink hair, and impulsively asked her own stylist to do the same to her. She described what happened next as one of the most liberating moments of her entire life. For the first time since she'd started working at age 3, she said, nobody in the room could tell her, "No, you can't do that," because she was, quite literally, dying. And if not now, when? She thought of an old poem about a warrior riding into battle with plume afloat, and decided that whatever happened next, she would go out exactly the same way. When she finally showed her husband, half expecting the wildly conservative dresser to recoil, Mike Farrell loved it instantly and kept encouraging her to redo it for years afterward whenever the color began to fade. It's a small, glowing detail, but it says everything about a marriage built not on performance, but on 2 people simply, fully accepting each other exactly as they were. The physical recovery after her transplant in October of 2000 took years, she said, and it wasn't until nearly 3 years out from the surgery that something unexpected happened. She became deeply depressed, and then, cruelly, depressed about being depressed, furious with herself for feeling anything but gratitude after being handed what she called an entire second chance at life. It was only later that she understood what was actually happening. She hadn't been in denial about her illness, not exactly, but her body had spent every ounce of available energy simply healing, and it was only once the healing was mostly finished that the emotions she'd been holding at bay finally arrived, delayed but unavoidable, demanding to be felt. She never once described it as weakness. If anything, the way she spoke about it years later carried something closer to wonder, a genuine curiosity about how the human mind protects itself for exactly as long as it needs to, and not one moment longer. And then there is the story that, in the days since her passing, has taken on a weight almost nobody could have anticipated when she first told it. While working on the set of Coach during the depths of her illness, Shelley Fabares said she had what she believed, in her own words, was an out-of-body experience, a moment where she felt herself quite clearly beginning to leave. She didn't see a light, she said, and she wasn't moving toward anything in particular. She was simply going. And what struck her most, she explained, was how beautiful it was, how far beyond peaceful, beyond even her own understanding of love, an all-encompassing warmth she'd only ever heard other people try, and fail, to fully describe. In that moment, she said only 2 things made her sad. She worried about whoever might walk into the green room and find her gone, and she thought of her husband, wishing desperately she could tell him thank you and love him one more time. She came back, obviously, that time, but she said the memory of that peace never left her, that she could still summon the feeling instantly, decades later, simply by thinking about it, and that it had permanently loosened the grip fear once held over her. She'd spent her entire life, she admitted, certain since early childhood that she would die young, convinced for reasons she could never quite explain that cancer would eventually claim her. Reaching 45, then 50, she said, felt almost like outliving her own prophecy. Reading her words now, in the days since her actual death, it is almost impossible not to feel that she had already shown us, years in advance, exactly what this moment would be like for her: gentle, enveloping, and entirely without fear. That same fearlessness and that same tenderness shaped how Shelley Fabares carried her mother through the final stages of Alzheimer's disease, a battle that eventually claimed Elsa Fabares' life in 1992 and reshaped the rest of Shelley's own. She and her sister spent years trying to understand what was happening to their mother before doctors could even offer a diagnosis, watching her underline appointment notes with increasingly frantic, repeated exclamation points, small handwritten evidence of a mind slowly losing its grip on time. Her mother had once said, early on, that if she ever learned she had Alzheimer's, she would take her own life rather than face it, a statement Shelley carried with her for years afterward, never certain how much her mother ultimately understood about what was happening to her. Near the very end, doctors told the family that unless Elsa began eating again, they would have to insert a feeding tube. Shelley went to her mother's bedside alone and spoke to her exactly as she always had, as though her mother could hear and fully understand every word, even though there was no way to know for certain. She told her mother that if she was ready to go, the family would support her, would be with her every step of the way. But if she wasn't ready, she said, she needed to start eating again, because the alternative was a feeding tube and everything that came with it. Her mother simply stared around the room, the unfocused gaze so many Alzheimer's patients eventually carry. Shelley stepped out into the hallway for a moment to speak with a nurse. When she came back, her mother was sitting up, eating for the first time in months. Whatever her mother truly understood in that moment, Shelley said, she chose to believe that somewhere, on some level too deep for words, her mother had heard her and made a choice. It was, in its own quiet way, the same lesson Shelley would later describe from her own brush with death, that love finds a way through, even when the body and the mind can no longer fully cooperate with each other. Shelley Fabares spent the final decades of her life turning nearly every hardship she survived into something offered back to other people. She worked with the Alzheimer's Association for 16 years, advocating for research and support in her mother's memory. She spoke openly, almost fearlessly, about her own illness and recovery, hoping it might comfort someone else walking the same frightening road. And she built, alongside Mike Farrell, a partnership that outlasted nearly everything else in her extraordinary life. Farrell, born in South St. Paul, Minnesota, and a former United States Marine before he ever set foot on a soundstage, spent 8 seasons playing the gentle, devoted Captain B.J. Honeycutt on MASH, a performance that made him, alongside Alan Alda, one of the emotional anchors of one of the most beloved shows in television history. He carried that same gentleness into his own life outside acting, spending more than 2 decades as president of Death Penalty Focus, lobbying and speaking against capital punishment across the country, work he once described as having moved him to tears many times over, sustained only by the people he met along the way who kept fighting anyway. It was that same steady, patient quality
that Shelley leaned on through every hospital pager, every waiting room, every long night of her illness. And it was that same quality Farrell brought right back to her, unwavering for more than 40 years. Their marriage, grounded in the simple, radical act of being fully known and fully accepted, became a partnership neither one of them ever seemed to take for granted, even decades in. The family's statement released this week described her as a devoted wife, a cherished stepmother, a daughter, sister, niece, aunt, and loyal friend, whose warmth and grace made a lasting difference in the lives of everyone who knew her. They spoke of her remarkable ability to make people feel welcomed, valued, and cared for, promising to remember her kindness, her loyalty, her wit, her courage, and her beautiful spirit for the rest of their own lives. Heartbroken by her loss, they said, yet profoundly grateful for the years they shared with her, comforted in knowing that her work and the memories she left behind with everyone who loved her would carry on. But perhaps no tribute captures her quite as completely as her own words, spoken years before any of us knew we'd need them, about what waits on the other side of a life fully lived. It was, she said, beyond peaceful, beyond love as we normally understand it, and the only thing she wished for in that moment was more time to say thank you. To Mike Farrell, and to everyone who ever loved her from the other side of a television screen, singing along to Johnny Angel, watching her grow up on the Donna Reed show, laughing with her in a beat-up gas station Maserati, holding her mother's hand through the darkest years of her life. That thank you now belongs entirely to her, and to the 50 remarkable years she spent giving every ounce of herself away, quietly, generously, and without ever once asking for anything back.